So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the session on the development and trade link and the Agenda 2030, leveraging the development impact of market forces through international cooperation. This is a long title, but I think some of the keywords, we're familiar with the trade and development, but some of the keywords are really about the importance of market forces, but how can these market forces be responsible market forces and leveraging, which is the big challenge that we have there. We all know that the Agenda 2030 is about trying to stimulate development in the broad sense and giving much more importance to the question of economic activities, but responsible economic activities, and in that context, of course, the role of trade and developments and their linkages is very important, and trade being one of the means of implementation also of these developments. We've started a bit late, so that's because the previous opening ceremony was slightly overrun, but we have to finish on time. So let me just give you a very brief practical indication. First, welcome, and we have a very distinguished panel with us today to discuss some of these issues for this meeting that is a session that is organized jointly by DG Trade and DG Development. You know that we have received on your applications of on the app of the meeting, EDD, you can find in these apps the possibilities to ask questions. So I will just quickly explain how to do that. So you can already, during the course of the discussion that we'll have with the panel, you can start asking your questions via the panel. And to do that, you just have to go through your app, and you have to go to the menu section, and you press on Q&A. And then you have the room numbers that are appearing, and we're here in the auditorium 3. So you have to press A3, and then you are able to type your questions and send your questions. We'll have a discussion with the panel, and at the end of the discussion with the panel, I'll open questions from the floor, so you're most welcome to raise your questions directly from the floor, but if you want to send them in writing, this is the way you have to proceed. You're, of course, also welcome to tweet your remarks and your comments through using the hashtag EDD16. My name is San Bilal, and I'm from the European Center for Development Policy Management, and it is my pleasure to welcome and to moderate the discussion with the panel. Let me perhaps introduce to the different members of the panel. We have the Commissioner Malmström. Thank you very much for being there, the Trade Commissioner. We have Mike Delbecq from the Inclusive, who is the Executive Director of Inclusive Business Sweden. On the other side of the podium, we have also another private sector representative, Mr. Richard Fox, who is the Chairman of the Kenya Flower Council. And we have another distinguished guest, who is Ms. Arantxa Gonzalez, who is the Executive Director of the International Trade Center. We have also with us Mr. Stephen Nelatambi, who is the Vice President of the African Development Bank. We have, since we are with bankers, we have also Maya Shobarangan, who is the Deputy Director of Global Partner Countries. She'll tell us what it is, from the European Investment Bank. And we have our young leader, Nestor Dehuinji, and I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name, who is a journalist. So in fact, he should be probably the one moderating this debate, not me, who is a journalist with an expertise on trade and development, and he will share with us some of the views. As you know, the European dimension is quite important in pushing the agenda for trade and development, not only because of the work that the European Union has been doing in pushing for the 2030 agenda, but it's also earlier, just following the adoption of the 2030 agenda, the European Commission adopted a new trade strategy, the Trade for All strategy, and this year the European Union is also in the process of revising its Aid for Trade strategy. So this kind of discussion is very timely to think about the implementation. So let me start immediately turning to you, Commissioner. Since you launched this strategy, which is supposed to provide a new impetus in the European policy, but my question is, what is new in this strategy? Because trade and development has been something that has been on the agenda of the European Union for quite a long time. So is the strategy just trying to catch up with the practice that has been over the last few years, and especially also before coming to the 2030 agenda? Are you trying to catch up with the practice and update your strategy to reflect what is the current approach of the European Union, or are you trying to do something different post-strategy?
Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very honored to be in this panel with these distinguished panelists. Well, Mr. Moderator, the EU supports very much the 2030 agenda, and I think the Trade for All strategy is both, actually. On the one hand, we need to catch up with what we have been doing for quite some time, but it is also a reflection of the need to put our trade policy in a much more strategic, long-term format, where issues such as transparency, inclusiveness, the EU values that we want to promote, and of course the link between trade and development, but also other policy areas, need to be put in a more strategic, comprehensive matter. So we are doing this because there is a global demand, and there is a parallel global development that we need to make sure that we fit into. People today want to know how trade functions, how are trade deals made. They want to be informed. They want to make sure that there is information available. They want to know what is the impact of our trade agreements. Is there child labor involved? What is the ecological footprint? How can EU, the biggest trade bloc in the world, how can we make sure that we promote our values and that we contribute to not only making trade agreements beneficial for our economies, but also that our partners benefit in a sustainable and fair way? And this has, of course, is nothing new, but it is something that we wanted to put in a much more strategic way, because this new Commission under Juncker wants to work that way, and making sure that the old silo mentalities that has been existing between the different departments and DGs are torn down, and that we work much better. So that's why we include now in all our trade agreements a special chapter on sustainable development, which reflects very much the 2030 agenda, where we commit to the ILO main conventions, where we make sure that we promote fair and sustainable trade, where we also make sure that international conventions when it comes to human rights and sustainable development environment are respected. And this is something we intend to work on, both between us and our partners, but also with partners towards third area. We are also making sure that trade agreements are not only something that is good on paper, but that they can deliver in practice. And that is why, as you mentioned, the aid for trade is so important, because in order to trade, we need to make sure that the tools are there, that there is the infrastructure, both the physical infrastructure, but also that there are people who can deal with customs formula, that they can deal with computer systems, that there are agencies to make sure that the food is safe to export, etc., etc. And that is why aid for trade has actually been very useful and efficient, as shown by evaluations by WTO and OECD. We have provided with our member states 12 billion euros the last 3 years, and we work very much in partnership with other international organizations in order to make sure that it is working.
So, Commissioner, if you just allow me then to interrupt you there. Since indeed there's been a lot of support providing from Aid for Trade, what do you think should be done differently or additionally from Europe in pushing the 2030 agenda and in the revision of the Aid for Trade? How would you like to see a revision of the Aid for Trade approach given the 2030 agenda and given the experience that the EU has in this field?
Well, that is why it's so timely to be here today, because I think today this very qualified panel can give some inputs, because we are now in that reflection period. What has worked less good? I think we should focus more on public-private partnerships. We should focus more also on good governance. We should focus more on sustainable development, the corporate social responsibility, and increased transparency. These are issues that we have already there, but they need to be developed. But we are right now in the process of listening and consulting. So it's very timely to be here, and I'm looking forward to get some good input from people who really have experience on the ground here.
Very good. So that's a perfect transition, perhaps, to turn to the private sector, since you're mentioning the importance of public-private partnership and the importance of the sustainability dimension. Mike Debelek, you're the Executive Director of Inclusive Business Sweden. So I guess that your objective is to try to promote this inclusiveness. What do you think is the contribution that the EU could do, and what do you see the directions for these public-private partnerships that could be done differently? I mean, we all agree that public-private partnerships are important and we want sustainability. So how to do that better?
Okay. Yeah, I think in my mind it comes down to, there's two broad areas. One is around responsibility and one is around opportunity. And I think that when we look at responsibility, it's about managing supply chains, it's about managing the ecological footprint, it's about some of the things that Cecilia mentioned. And in my mind, that's been fairly well grounded in Europe for a while. And while we need to do better in terms of CSR, corporate social responsibility, this is something that's been developing and continued to develop over the last couple of decades. And it's good to see the Trade for All policy trying to further that. But I think the potentially a new area where there's more of an opportunity is looking at how do we see how do we see development and the SDGs also as a business opportunity. That's what we refer to when we say inclusive business. And for example, you know, there are 800 million people who don't have access to clean water, 1 million who don't have access to healthcare, 1 in 8 who don't have enough to eat, 1.3 who don't have access to electricity. Huge challenges, but there are also huge opportunities. And we try to look at how can that actually be an opportunity and what role can EU businesses play. And now with the introduction of the SDGs, I think it's never a better time for businesses to take a step up and work with government, with civil service, civil society, to actually work towards the SDGs. Not only is it a development imperative, but it's a growth imperative as well. When we look at the growth in the EU, we're expecting GDP growth of around 1.8%. But in a lot of low-income countries, it's 6, 7, 8% and upwards. So how do we actually tap into that? And I think that, I guess the challenge I would like to lay out for a little bit for the panel and for Europe and for actors in Europe is that we have the tools of trade, investment, aid. We've had those tools for a while. Can we actually also bring in a policy of what we call co-creation, where we have this people, planet, and prosperity through partnership? Let's actually work together rather than at arm's length.
Okay, but these are the principles which I'm sure almost everybody agrees on. But what concretely then would you like to see the EU to do differently or to stimulate such partnerships? I mean, from the private side, you try to be more inclusive. What is the kind of support or engagement you're expecting from the European institutions?
I think it'd be great to enable more of a co-creation between different types of actors, because I think that
by creating platforms, or how do you do this enabling?
Yeah, okay. Well, I think that what the EU and national governments have done for a while is they've done a great job in creating these treaties, policies between different governments and different institutes around the world, and we have these structures set up. Can we bring that same sort of capacity building that we've built between governments to actually do that more between governments, business, and the civil society? because I think that there is still a lot of, when you look at those international connections, still a lot of focus on trying to get governments to work together in partnership, and let's bring business more into that. I think the tools are there. I don't think it's about creating new stuff, but it's about being more inclusive in the way that we work.
There's a lot of talk. I'm not sure there's sometimes enough practice, but let's turn to perhaps an African perspective from the private sector. I mean, Mr. Fox, you're the chairman of the Kenya Flower Councils, and I noted in your logo that you have these themes growing responsibly. So I guess that's the notion of business responsibility and responsible management is high on your agenda. How do you see it in the context of the 2030 agenda?
Yes, I think the world is looking for products which are sustainably produced. The customer wants to be confident that what he's getting is sustainably produced, so there is a significant agenda in terms of making sure that those products are produced in that way. I think looking at the trade agreements that, such as the EPA, which are important for
EPAs are just the economic partnership agreements
are important to encourage trade from developing economies, but they're not a solution on their own to facilitating that. There needs to be parallel investment in creating an enabling business environment. And so we need investment in infrastructure, in logistics, regulatory frameworks, which I think have also been mentioned, and also finance. But we need to recognize that emerging businesses compete with other local businesses for quite often natural resources that are in limited supplies, such as water, energy, and land. So there is a need for this public sector, private sector participatory approach to establish equitable access to resources for everybody, whilst recognizing there's a need to support both the export industries and the local industries. And the private sector needs to be engaged more directly, I think, to prioritize what needs perhaps the EU could fund or support going forward. And PPP is not just about private sector contributing financially to development or sustainable development. It's about creating a multi-stakeholder dialogue so that everybody's interests can be allowed. And finally,
perhaps let me just turn to the concrete aspects. Since the East African community is going to sign in the next few weeks, Commissioner, when is the signing?
We hope so. We hope
July?
in the next mid-July. We hope.
Mid-July?
Yes. Looking at the details.
Okay.
It's basically done. Yeah.
So mid-July, there will be a signing of the economic partnership agreements between the European Union and East African community. So once the agreement is signed, comes the question of course, legalistic aspects of ratification, but there's a question of implementation. So what would you like to see as a Kenyan East African private sector? What would you like to see as the first steps for implementation and initiatives that could be taken both by the EU, but also perhaps by the regions of your country or by yourself to help in the implementation?
I think it's the EU is the second largest trading partner for the East African community, therefore it's a very important market. And I think what we need is market certainty. We've lived with uncertainty for the past 7 or 8 years in the process of negotiating the EPA, and I think that's had a negative effect on investment. So with the EPA, we will have assured trading conditions with the EU, and I think we will see an upsurge in investment, not only in floriculture, but in horticulture and many other industries that rely on a good trading agreement with the EU.
But any specific steps that should be taken in the implementation? I mean, you have a chance to influence the commissioner, and what are the first actions? Because what we've seen in some of these other agreements is that once the agreement is signed, there is a sense of relief and passivity, and not much is happening. And then we wait to see if yes or no the ambition of having a positive sustainable impact is there or not. I mean, what can we do between the moment where we do these assessments and between the moment we sign and when we do the assessment? What do we do to ensure that it has a positive impact?
Well, I think certainly, as you say, the private sector will breathe a sigh of relief because they will know what their trading terms are. But as I mentioned, there needs to be continued investment in logistics, in infrastructure, to allow others to come into the industry. There are a number of long-established businesses there, but there's still an opportunity. And you look at the development of Ethiopia certainly in the floriculture industry in the last 5 or 6 years, and that is a result of uncertainty within Kenya, for example. So I think we need to have continued investment in the infrastructure, and also looking at, one thing I was going to say is that what you don't want is a 5-star export industry and a 2-star local industry. Yeah. You need to invest in the local industry as well, and this is about better management of water, better management of resources. So I think there are some traditional areas where the EU has supported Africa in the past, and I think those should start should continue.
Good. I hope you took notes, Commissioner. Mrs. Arantxa Gonzalez, this is your daily business to help developing countries and business to take advantage of trade opportunities. How to reconcile, or not necessarily to reconcile, but how to strengthen this focus on sustainability, on taking the business opportunities, so making sense of these trade agreements that are and trade opportunities that exist, but in a way that is responsible, that is respecting the environments, the labor conditions, and social positive impact that these agreements are supposed to develop. What are some of the directions that you put in the work of ITC based on your experience?
Well, my starting point, Sam, is that there is no contradiction between trade and human and social development, which is a bit what the question kind of tried to imply. There is no contradiction. Trade is an instrument, so the question is how you use this instrument. My advice is use this instrument in a manner that is sustainable and inclusive. These 2 dimensions are key. Now, how? Because you want the how. 3 things. 1, you have to make trade possible. This means reducing obstacles to trade. This is what trade agreements do. And this is why it is important to get these trade agreements through, whether the agreement is the EU EAC, whether the agreement is the EU-Canada, whether it is about Liberia, since we have the Liberian trade minister with us, becoming a member of the WTO. Reduce obstacles to trade. That will make it possible. And when you do that, please make sure you address 21st century obstacles to trade, not 19th century obstacles to trade. It's services. It's non-tariff barriers. 2, make trade coherent with your domestic policies. Trade alone will not solve the problems of inclusiveness and sustainability. You need innovation policy. You need environmental laws. You need social protection. You need labor laws. That is what you have to put together, coherent with your trade policy. 3, since we are in the world of Twitter and we only have 3 minutes, my 3rd is make trade happen. That's the part of the business I'm in. For that, it's hard infrastructure, and we'll hear a lot about that probably from the banks, but let's not forget, in this new Aid for Trade strategy, the soft infrastructure. It's the biggest element for a business to take advantage of a trade agreement. It's called competitiveness. It's called quality. It's called productivity. It's called branding. It's called labeling. If you don't have all of this, you don't get to market. So some make trade possible.
Okay, I get your point, but at the same time, when we hear about competitivity, including in Europe, then quite often it's the idea that you need to reduce the cost of production, which means you perhaps need to reduce the working conditions for some of the quality of the working conditions for some of the people in the
Absolutely
jobs.
not.
So how do you prevent, you say no, how do you prevent that from happening? Because you know there will be tendencies to do that. Some businesses will try to cut their costs in order to increase their profit margins. So how do you prevent that, and what are the kind of issues that also donors and other partners can come up and bring to ensure that this does not happen and that you have the real benefit from trade?
There is a big thing called consumer, and there is a big thing called transparency. And consumers everywhere want transparency because they want to know that what they buy has an input that is benefiting also those who produced it. I had a discussion this morning at 9 a.m. on agriculture. You know, we consume 600 million cups of coffee every year. 600 million. Ask who is behind this coffee. Behind this coffee, we see lots of women in coffee. Behind this coffee, we see organic coffee. Behind this coffee, we see certified coffee of high quality. Ask who is behind. There is no need to lower labor standards. There is a need to add more value. Add more value is called innovation. It's called investments in quality. It's got good branding strategies, differentiating your products. It's not in lowering your standards of labor that you will get the long-term value proposition that your customers are looking for.
Very good. Let's hope this will happen. We have to break some of the discussion. I just wanted to turn to the audience and do a little live poll that we can do for those of you who have their apps on the computer, on your mobile phone. If you go to the app again, you go to the menu. This time, instead of pressing on Q&A, you press on Vote, and then you click to the room A3, because we're on the auditorium A3, and then you should see the numbers that are appearing on the app, and these are the questions. What is the most impactful way to support sustainable economic growth in developing countries? 1, if you think it's ODA. 2, if you think it's public loans. 3, if you think it's private investments. 4, if it's trade agreements. And 5, business voluntary sustainability assurance schemes, the CSR type of approach. So I just repeat, you need to go to your mobile phone, menu, to the app, menu, go on the votes, and then you can select one. You can select only one. Are you ready? We'll have 15 seconds to vote when I say ready.
All of the above.
Ready? Go. We can vote. So you press 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. 10 more seconds. I'm glad I don't have to vote. I'm not sure what I will choose. Private investments is obviously the core, and very interestingly, ODA and public loans, very, very low scores. So perhaps the key issue is in terms of how to stimulate, and perhaps the take I will derive from that is that in revising the aid for trade, perhaps the key issue is how to stimulate private investments. And not just to think about how to use grants to do many different things around aid for trade. But very interestingly, also the second, and not perhaps too surprisingly in a session dealing with trade, is the question of trade agreements and voluntary supports. These are some very interesting results. I was anticipating a bit more of ODA, so it shows perhaps that the 2030 agenda is indeed leading to some kind of shift. Let me turn to a financier. Mr. Stefan Naletambi, you are the Vice President of the African Development Bank. You are sitting on a lot of money and you have a lot of power to help change the world and support development. one of the issues of the 2030 agenda is to try to break this silo approach that the Commissioner was also mentioning before. We all try to work in a segmented way. The advantage, of course, of the African Development Bank is to be able to see these overall visions. How do you see trade, and perhaps in your context, the notion of trade finance, as one of the possibilities to stimulate this sustainability impact that trade can have for SDGs?
Okay, thank you. And first of all, thank you for inviting me. I'm very pleased to be here. As you know, the African Development Bank actually does both public sector and private sector lending. So we lend to both. We also do basically working with the governments and working with the private sector. And as we say, it's private sector led and public sector enabled. And on this, I'm pleased to see, in fact, that private investment is the #1 response, because at the end of the day, the most important is that we do stimulate private investment, especially in Africa in particular. Let me put these things into context. First of all, trade, international trade, Africa represents 3% of the overall trade. So we're really epsilon in the world at this point. What we do at the bank, and we've really seen that this has been even more important following the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, where a lot of European and US banks actually pulled out of doing trade in Africa. We've had to replace them. The IFC and the World Bank has been working with us on this. EIB also does. But I mean, there's been a lot of importance of, in fact, the MDBs to support the trade work. And in particular, we have created a financial sector department, which I actually run. I'm actually the acting vice president at the moment. I run the financial sector development department. But we do have a trade finance group that actually does lend close to $800 million per year to different private sector banks on the continent, either for liquidity reasons, for short-term liquidity for up to 3 years, or risk participation agreements that we do with them. And through these risk participation agreements we do with local banks or foreign banks, we actually allow to these banks to actually access many more smaller banks that we wouldn't be the issuing banks for these for this trade. They have access to money. Now, what's important, coming back to the sustainable development issues alongside this, we've actually introduced in the way we deal with these private sector banks a lot of criteria and a lot of markers, I'd say, linked to lending to infrastructure, energy, agriculture, agribusiness, manufacturing. As you know, we have the President Adesina joined the bank in September last year, and we have a 10-year strategy which is based on inclusive growth and a transition to green growth. But in particular, we do have what we call the high fives, which is power and light Africa, feed Africa, industrialize Africa, integrate Africa, and improve the lives of the people of Africa. So, of course, through that, even us at our level, it trickles down. And when we do lend to these different types of institutions, we make sure that we do focus on SMEs through the banking system that we work with, on SMEs that are working either in the energy sector or the agricultural sector, etc. So this is really to give you an idea of the situation now.
And perhaps just allow me to interrupt.
Yes.
We often hear from African SMEs that access to finance remains the major hurdle.
Absolutely.
So what do you see as the key bottlenecks that have to be tackled, in spite of all the work that you have been doing? What do you see as the key impediments to this access to finance?
That's another session. But
in 3 words.
there's several things. First of all, and this was mentioned earlier on, you have the international markets, you're looking outward looking, but you're also looking at the domestic markets. So there's 2 levels. One level is access to foreign currency, which is where we come in. We can support that to a certain extent because, of course, the access is very difficult for a lot of banks. But secondly, the domestic markets, where there's a lot of potential, and unfortunately the economy is a bit too informal, but there's a huge potential for us to actually on-lend in local currencies. And the fact is that the local bankers don't bring these companies to market. Corporate bonds is a very small market. It's still nascent, which is why there is a need for us also to stimulate even the domestic bond markets for them to play their role. I'm sure you recall for the US and for Europe, a lot of our infrastructure was actually funded by public savings through the bond markets. It doesn't happen that much in Africa. There's no recycling of money. Unfortunately, there's very little of it, and the capital markets are not strong enough. If I may just add to that, I wanted to come to the soft infrastructure issues, which I think go in tandem. You cannot only work on the lending side. There's a whole aspect of soft infrastructure issues. And in fact, on the trade side in particular, and I'm not a specialist, but the trade side in particular, we have seen beyond just the agreements, first of all, there's the enforcement of the agreements, which is another can of worms. But beyond that, there is also the non-tariff issues. And in Africa, it's quite big in a lot of our countries. And in fact, we were just having a meeting in Abidjan as we speak on the non-tariff issues that we're trying to bring the West African countries that have a common currency to now overcome. And this may be too many roadblocks, where there's all sorts of requests that are made, too much paperwork. So there's a huge amount of non-tariff barriers that we have to make sure that are also dealt with at the highest level to allow for intra-Africa trade as well to develop.
And the African Development Bank is involved in that,
Absolutely.
or you're saying this? Yes?
Absolutely. No,
in which capacity? What do you do in this
context? Well, what
context?
we do in there is we actually do, first of all, we work with organizations like Arantxa, the one that Arantxa leads, and others. But what we do is we provide capacity building, and we fund some of these grants. And alongside that, especially for in the transport world, so that you know that transport, especially regional roads networks that you're building, you have to create an institutional framework that brings all the countries together to see the value of all this. All this is the soft side, where we actually support the building of these different the institution building, which is huge. This is a non-profitable part of the bank, of course, because it's a grant funded type, but it's extremely important. And we do have, as I said, one of our 5 high fives is integrate Africa. So part of the integration agenda is on the soft infrastructure side.
Very good, thank you very much. Perhaps this is a side that is a bit less known, that's the heavy investment of the African Development Bank on hard infrastructure that gets a lot of the attention. So thank you for pointing that out. Let me turn to Maria Shaw Baragan from the European Investment Bank. How, from your side, do you address this issue? And the European Investment Bank is, I was once told, is also known as the European Invisible Bank because it's not known enough and it's sometimes not used enough, not only in Europe but also outside Europe. And,
okay.
And how do you relate the trade agreements? We were mentioning, for instance, economic partnership agreements with Africa. How do you relate this trade policy framework with the kind of investments that and activities that you're having, and more broadly, the Aid for Trade agenda that is also under review at the European level?
Okay, I'm happy to answer. Let me first thank the Commission. I'm really pleased that the EIB was invited to this session to thank DG Trade and DG DevCo to have us here. And I'm going to take, what you said, the invisible bank. We don't put the focus
on... I was told that by EIB banker.
Yeah, no, it's okay. It's okay. I don't really mind, because it is, you don't need to see us. You need to feel us. So you need to feel the difference that we are making, both in the Union and outside the Union. So yes, we are lending 80 billion euros a year. Most of this is within the Union. We're doing around 8 billion euros of lending outside the Union in the Mediterranean, in the ACP region, in Latin America, and in Asia. And when you were asking what do global partners mean, it's these. It's ACP, Asia, and Latin America. Those are the areas I am responsible for. And what we do is, we are the invisible bank, maybe. We are the EU bank. That I can assure you we are. And what we do is we finance to support EU policies. So what we do is promote, through finance, the EU values that the Commissioner was also mentioning.
But focus on trade.
Yes,
we don't have time to go through the whole EIB work.
Because
focus on trade, please.
The point is, we do lending, blending, and advisory. In lending, we do a lot of what has also been mentioned here, of investment into vital enabling infrastructure. So it's infrastructure not for the sake of infrastructure. It is because it is what will enable our other second main focus, which is private sector development. It is not possible to produce and to have a factory if you do not have transport to the factory, if you don't have access to electricity, energy, water. All these things are necessary to enable the rest of growth and industrialization in Africa and in other parts of the world. So what we see is that investment is a prerequisite to trade, Both of them contribute to economies being integrated in the global economy, and both of them create jobs, which is what we're into, creation of quality jobs. And both of them boost the potential of the economic growth of any developing economy. 2 weeks ago, I was in Zambia, by the way, at the annual meeting of the African Development Bank, and I was talking to what we call an agro-industry entrepreneur. When he introduced himself to me, he told me he was a farmer, but this is how we call them. So he was telling me, one of the things we need is roads. We need roads to be able to transport our perishable produce to the places where we can sell them. And even more if you're a landlocked country and you need to be able to transport them to a port so that you can send them by sea. So this is one of the things we're doing. We're also supporting a lot on finance, access to finance, and we will probably be able to talk more about this. And then how we do it. You probably want to know, and with this I conclude. We do it in constant interaction with the European Union External Action Services and with European Union services. So it is really almost on a daily basis. We work with them on the national programs. They have national programs, and we work on the implementation of those national programs. We work with the multilateral development banks, and this is so that we all work on our strengths, and we create partnerships.
Could you perhaps just in 1 minute elaborate how you work with the African Development Bank? Because obviously you do have similar objectives when you operate in Africa. Yeah. And the 2030 agenda is about creating leverage. And how do you combine your energy and also to bring in the private sector in this endeavor? Because if each one, and we have seen that for many years, that there are many good initiatives and tons of very nice projects, but as the Commissioner was saying before, quite often in silos. So we have a trade capacity building activity, and we have next to it another activity by a different donor, and then the EIB, and then different. Could you explain how you work together, and perhaps, or how do you intend to work even more together in the future, and what you intend to do differently?
We co-finance together very, very often. So, but I can tell you to be very specific, because you said in 1 minute. We are right now working together on a concept that is called Boost Africa. Boost Africa is finance for innovative, high-growth, small and medium-sized enterprises across the whole continent. And we are going to provide, again, some of the things, so resonating on things that have been said today. A technical assistance pool. We're going to have a knowledge lab, so for the soft capacity building, and there will be impact finance. This is equity, seed funds, acceleration funds, support to business angels, and equity and crowdfunding. So this we are working on right now, and it is together with the European Commission. They are providing 1/3, African Development Bank 1/3, European Investment Bank 1/3. This is concrete, and this is coming up, if things go well, within this year.
Okay, thank you very much. This is what we're doing. Because I was glancing at the questions, and quite often they ask for kind of concrete examples, not be too broad. Mr. Nestor De Ouinji, and by the way, that's the time for you, in case you don't speak French, to make sure you have headphones so you can listen to the interpretation, because I understand, Nestor, you will speak French. Quand vous entendez cette discussion qui a lieu sur le panel, vous vouliez intervenir, participer à ce panel à cause de votre intérêt sur les chaînes de valeur, les opportunités de développement et comment le commerce peut y contribuer. Qu'est-ce que vous retenez de ces discussions? Quels sont les points saillants? Est-ce que vous trouvez ça encourageant, ou vous avez l'impression que c'est une répétition de ce que vous aviez déjà entendu?
Merci beaucoup pour la question et merci pour l'invitation que me fait l'Union européenne. Je voudrais vous faire une petite confidence. Le 8 juin, il y a une semaine, lorsque je prenais mon vol de Cotonou pour Bruxelles, j'ai fait une escale à Abidjan. Et à Abidjan, j'ai un nouveau voisin qui monte à bord de l'avion. Il me dit « Bonjour monsieur, vous travaillez aux Nations Unies ?» Je dis « Non, mais pourquoi ?» Et il me dit « En fait, ça fait 2 ans que mon frère, qui a fait l'université et qui a fini un master, un bac+4, n'a pas de travail. Et donc, Il est en train de développer un projet pour créer sa propre entreprise, mais il a besoin de financement. Et j'ai cru que vous êtes des Nations Unies, donc vous alliez m'aider à trouver un financement pour mon jeune frère. Alors, cette histoire, qui a l'air de la réalité que vivent plusieurs jeunes en Afrique, montre à quel point la question du chômage est une question cruciale. C'est peut-être vrai que je me confondrais dans le privilège d'être assimilé à un cadre des Nations Unies, mais pour moi, c'est une question qui touche la jeunesse mondiale. Que l'on soit au Bénin, en Tunisie ou même en Belgique, la question du chômage des jeunes est une question cruciale, mais à des proportions moindres en fonction de l'espace où on se retrouve. Et pourquoi alors le chômage des jeunes? Moi, je le catégorise en deux parties. Il y a des jeunes qui viennent de l'université, qui veulent avoir un emploi salarié chez l'État. Et ils n'ont pas forcément l'emploi parce que l'État n'est pas le meilleur pourvoyeur d'emploi. Il y a d'autres qui veulent créer leur propre entreprise, s'employer eux-mêmes, être leur propre patron, et aussi employer d'autres jeunes pour contribuer à résoudre la question du chômage des jeunes. Alors, quand j'écoute les autres panélistes, j'ai l'impression que tout va bien. Mais ce n'est pas forcément le cas parce que la jeunesse africaine, elle a mal. Et je pense qu'elle a mal, mais j'ai aussi des propositions pour des solutions concrètes et adéquates pour qu'on prenne en considération le mal dont souffre la jeunesse. Pour moi, première solution, il faut réformer les curricula de formation. Parce qu'aujourd'hui, il est démontré par plusieurs experts que l'éducation n'est pas en adéquation avec le milieu de l'entreprise ou de l'entrepreneuriat. Donc, il faut forcément réformer le milieu de l'éducation. Deuxième aspect fondamental, c'est qu'aujourd'hui, il y a plusieurs jeunes qui ont des start-up, mais qui n'ont pas le financement pour pouvoir développer leur entreprise. Et donc, ça pose un problème. Comment nous allons financer les petites et moyennes entreprises? Moi, j'ai la chance d'avoir avec moi, c'est un privilège d'avoir avec moi la Banque africaine de développement, c'est un privilège d'avoir avec moi Mme Cécile Malmström. Et donc, je voudrais savoir ce qu'on fait pour que la jeunesse, précisément africaine, qui a des idées et qui veut entreprendre pour réduire le chômage, puisse être à même de se prendre en charge. Parce que ce n'est qu'à à cette condition qu'on pourra avoir un emploi décent pour les jeunes, comme le stipule l'objectif numéro 8 des ODD qui dit qu'il faut un emploi décent pour les jeunes. Et lorsque les jeunes ont des emplois décents, ils vont contribuer à la richesse dans leur pays et donc ils vont contribuer à la croissance économique qui sera durable mais aussi inclusive. Et donc, moi je pense que c'est fondamental que toutes ces belles politiques ici que j'ai entendues intègrent une dimension jeunesse pour que la jeunesse puisse avoir un mieux-être.
Ouais, merci beaucoup. I think it's this connection between trades and the broader policy framework. I mean, no need to trade is a means of implementation, but if you don't provide jobs for the young people in Africa, trade will be to no point.
If I may comment,
yes, please.
Juste pour vous répondre, je vais répondre en français d'ailleurs. Tout d'abord, il faut savoir que nous avons à la banque, justement à l'arrivée du président, il a constaté justement ce problème, il en est très conscient. Et une de nos stratégies qui vient d'être approuvée alongside the New Deal for Energy, c'est justement toute la politique pour le Jobs for Youth Initiative. Et c'est un travail très particulier. Justement, quand je me souviens très bien, j'étais au board lorsqu'on a discuté de la stratégie. Et nos partenaires européens qui sont sur le board nous disaient justement, nous n'avons pas su résoudre ce problème de l'emploi des jeunes. Chez nous, on ne l'a pas résolu. Pourquoi vous êtes si ambitieux? Et justement, le président a dit, justement, il faut être ambitieux. Il faut montrer que c'est quelque chose qui devient une politique vraiment volontariste de la part de la banque, sachant que, bien évidemment, elle doit s'engager pour que cela marche, il faut qu'il y ait un partenaire. Le partenaire, c'est l'État. Nous, on peut parler aux États, mais ce sont les États qui vont vraiment décider s'ils veulent aussi mettre en place ces politiques. Bien évidemment, on sait très bien que ça va jouer, il y aura toute une refonte du système éducatif, en tout cas en partie. Il y aura, et c'est en train de se faire, je peux vous donner l'exemple, la Tunisie. La Tunisie, justement, vous en avez parlé. La Tunisie, en 2012, après la Révolution, nous savons très bien que ça a été une révolution qui a été provoquée par en fait, justement, il y avait trop de bacheliers, du moins trop de maîtrisards qui avaient encore accès à Facebook, parce que Ben Ali, la seule chose qui n'avait pas interdit, c'était Facebook. Tout le reste était interdit, mais Facebook n'avait pas réussi à le contrôler. Et donc la révolution est partie de Facebook. Et la question, ce qui s'est passé, c'est qu'en Tunisie, ils avaient des très bons chiffres au niveau de higher education, mais il n'y avait pas d'emploi. Et donc les gens n'avaient que des sous-emplois et très mal payés, et donc ça a créé une très grosse frustration. Bref, on a constaté cela, et tout particulièrement dans les régions intérieures du pays. Alors, il y a eu une volonté entre la banque, entre les États de l'Europe aussi, parce que ça a été ce qu'on appelle la Deauville Partnership, pour lesquels l'Union européenne était involved, la Banque africaine de développement, la Banque islamique de développement, etc., de nombreux partenaires. C'était financé par des subventions, ce sont des grants, qu'on a donné à des entrepreneurs, justement à des jeunes entrepreneurs, pour lancer leurs entreprises. Alors bien évidemment, il fallait qu'ils mettent en place un business plan. Il y avait justement un lab pour les aider à mettre en place. Et d'ailleurs, on est arrivé à la deuxième phase, parce qu'on s'est rendu compte que ça a été tellement un succès, la première phase, on a refait un tour des bailleurs pour récupérer encore de l'argent. Et maintenant, il y a une deuxième phase. On est en train de le faire en Côte d'Ivoire. On est en train de le répliquer en Côte d'Ivoire, mais il faut savoir que ce sont des choses qui prennent du temps. Et il faut aussi qu'il y ait une politique volontariste du gouvernement dans ce sens. Et ce n'est pas toujours évident que ça se fasse immédiatement. Ça prend quelque temps. Mais comme disait Madame, nous avons, avec la BEI, justement, nous sommes en pourparlers pour réfléchir qu'il y ait une approche européenne, africaine, sur le sujet de l'emploi de la jeunesse, pour que justement la perception change au niveau des jeunes en Afrique, qu'ils sentent qu'il y a there is a future at home. C'est très important. Je m'arrêterai là.
Thank you very much for these comments. Perhaps that leads me just to an immediate reaction that normally when we look at the impact of trade, we pay a lot of attention to the trade creation and whether there's more trade flows and so on, but perhaps we should rather focus on whether it creates jobs, especially in developing countries, and in quality jobs, and that perhaps might be a stronger indicator than just simply whether trade flows are increasing. And so the notion that trade is a mean of implementation and not an end in itself is probably very important. We have the chance of having in the room Mr. Wade Warren, who is the assistant to the administrator to the US Agency for International Development. And I know that he wanted to participate to the whole discussion, but couldn't join earlier. Perhaps, may I ask you, from the USAID perspective, how do you combine these aid and trade dimensions in the trade agreements, and perhaps also connecting to these notions of ultimately it has to create jobs in developing countries?
Yes, thank you very much.
Perhaps you can stand up so everybody can see you.
No, I really appreciate the opportunity to make an intervention in this very interesting panel. And it's true in the United States we do endeavor to leverage our assistance and our trade together to promote development and create jobs. And we do that, I think, in two ways. One is the instruments themselves, the preferential trade agreements, can create an incentive for reforms in a country that will lead to private sector investment and to job creation. So when a country undertakes institutional reform or tries to bring regulatory regimes into conformity with regional and international standards, that encourages private sector investment and job creation. And so we feel like the trade agreements themselves are an incentive for growth and for poverty reduction. But in more direct answer to your question, we do attempt in the U.S. Agency for International Development, where I work, to design programs very intentionally that take advantage of our trade agreements. So I can give you a couple of examples. We have an agreement called the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act. It's a preferential trade agreement for African countries. It was enacted in the year 2000 for 15 years, and then last year it was extended for another 10 years, so it runs through 2025. And we design assistance programs specifically to take advantage of AGOA, of the Growth and Opportunity Act. So for instance, we have trade hubs in 3 places in Africa, and they work with African industries to take advantage of the AGOA provisions. So in Ethiopia, our East Africa Trade Hub helped increase shoe exports from Ethiopia to the United States by 30-fold. In Burundi, we worked with the coffee industry to increase coffee exports to the United States. And we've had similar programs in Sierra Leone, Liberia, Burkina Faso, Niger, all across Africa. If you look at the Western Hemisphere, we have a preferential trade agreement with Haiti. And we have also designed aid programs for Haiti to take advantage of that agreement. So we have worked with the textile and apparel industry to promote exports to the United States and created 30,000 jobs in Haiti in so doing. So we do believe that assistance and trade agreements working hand in hand can have an accelerating impact on growth.
And when you do that, since the challenge is quite often for the domestic private sector trying to export, they might differ depending where they export, but they are quite similar. Do you work with the European Union? Are there some joint initiatives? Because I know in Africa you have these competitiveness hubs. The European Union is also providing capacity building. Different donors are doing different opportunities. Is there not a possibility to have some kind of greater cooperation, perhaps even as part of TTIP? I don't know if it's
I think there is a possibility. On Friday we're having a development dialogue with the EU, and I think that's something we could talk about.
Okay, I didn't know, but
yeah. Thank you.
So you are going to discuss these kind of issues, because there is a multiplicity of initiatives, and sometimes, if we want to really leverage, which is 2030 agenda is really about trying to combine forces rather than to have a multiplicity of initiatives. Let's open the questions maybe now to the floor. I already have some written ones, but I think you have been very patient and very quiet, so I suggest we first take 3-4 questions from the floor. Perhaps just stand up and raise your hands and then introduce yourself, and please, short questions so we can have a maximum number of questions, collect a maximum number of questions for our panelists. Please.
Thank you. My name is Fernando Morales de la Cruz. I am from Café for Change, a startup being created to disrupt the global coffee, tea, and cocoa industry, because as it is working today, it actually perpetuates poverty. I'm very happy that the representative of USAID talked about the coffee project in Burundi. I'm also very happy that we are discussing the options. But what I would like to ask the panel, especially the commissioners, representatives also, is why don't we just get out of the box of what we already have been doing always that didn't work and start considering out-of-the-box options? For example, putting the consumer really to transfer his goodwill directly into the projects to eradicate poverty, because USAID or the European Union or even Germany will never have enough treasury to actually end poverty even in only the coffee lands. It requires billions. But if we put the consumer to do that with 10 cents per cup of coffee, a lot could change. In the White House, less than 1 cent per cup eradicates poverty. But in the European Commission, it's also not different.
Do you mean in promoting labeling and for sustainable
transparency in how much from what the consumer pays goes back to the coffee lands? Because in Burundi, they have extreme poverty, but in the coffee drank in USAID, I've been there, it's not his fault, there is less than 1 cent per cup. In the European Commission, it's no different. So if we pushed an out-of-the-box solution, a transparent share value system, and we actually said, okay, we're going to bring the consumer in, because the consumer has hundreds of billions in purchasing power. And we're going to say, would you like to pay 10 cents more?
Yeah, that's very clear. Thank you. Another question here and then behind.
My name is Elong Mbasi. I'm the Secretary General of UCLG Africa, United Cities and Local Government of Africa. Now I'll turn into French, if I may.
Allez-y.
OK. Les accords de partenariat économique se sont mis en place au moment où l'Union africaine se créait. L'Union africaine s'est créée dans l'objectif d'abord d'intégrer l'Afrique, de l'unir et de faire en sorte qu'on crée un marché intérieur africain qui ensuite va être un correspondant du marché, de tout le marché mondial, y compris le marché européen. Or, les accords de partenariat économique tels qu'ils sont montés actuellement coupent l'Afrique en multiples zones, à la limite concurrentes. Certains accords ont été conclus, ce qu'on appelle provisoires, mais avec une pression très forte pour que ce soit des accords définitifs, avec des pays singuliers, au point que, pour l'Afrique de l'Ouest, par exemple, il y a des pays de l'Afrique de l'Ouest qui se montent les uns contre les autres pour pousser à la signature de l'accord de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, dont le deadline c'est octobre, m'a-t-on dit, au point qu'aujourd'hui, les accords de partenariat économique sont en train de mettre en péril une des régions les plus avancées en matière d'intégration en Afrique. Et je pense qu'il faut prendre très au sérieux ce problème, parce que si on ne le prend pas au sérieux, il y a un risque majeur pour qu'il se traduise par des crises, et ces crises peuvent avoir des effets indésirables sur le développement des relations entre l'Europe et l'Afrique. Nous pensons sincèrement, nous croyons sincèrement que l'Union européenne pourrait inspirer l'Union africaine dans la consolidation d'un partenariat véritable. Ce que nous voyons maintenant, c'est que l'Union européenne se protège, va à la conquête des marchés et à la limite se préoccupe relativement peu du devenir de l'intégration africaine. Et ça, je crois que l'Union européenne ferait bien de réfléchir à nouveau avant qu'il ne soit trop tard.
Alors, comment éviter que des accords régionaux, des accords qui ont une portée régionale, s'ils ne sont pas acceptés par tous les membres d'une région, résultent dans la fragmentation de cette région avec un effet négatif? Il y a une question qui vient ici.
Hello, I'm Paula Woodman from the British Council, and I'm energised to join the discussion by the gentleman here. I would agree, we support a social enterprise programme globally, and we would agree that we want to look outside the box. It is about shared value, exactly as you say. It is about different models of economic growth. So you've asked the question, what can support economic growth? But we know from our studies that economic growth is often happening at the same time as worsening levels of inequality in country. So you have GDP growth going through the roof and you have inequalities plummeting at the same time. So we need to think outside of the box, as my friend at the front has said. We need to think more radically. I've heard today often said, we do not want business as usual, and yet actually, what do we have that is not actually business as usual here today? We need to think more radically.
So how to be more radical? I'll take a last question and then we'll turn back to the panel here in the back.
Thank you very much. My name is Kabrat Ababa. I'm from Ethiopia. I'm a social entrepreneur. I provide private ambulance service in my country, Ethiopia, the first of its type. My question is especially for the African Development Bank. What did you have for social entrepreneur like me? We are actually stuck. We have started in 2008. We have done a lot of job in saving life. I'm a medical person. I'm really very much concerned about somebody's life. But I want to make my venture a very sustainable one. So we choose cross-subsidization model in which we can take very good quality service for multinationals and we bring that money to provide 24/7 ambulance service for our local people. So we make this venture sustainable for the last 8 years, but it is very difficult for us to grow. The multinationals are looking for quality. They said, we don't compromise quality. This is saving life. And the poor people there, their life should be saved. I'm very much concerned about life than money. So how can I work? We need to really think out of the box and to be very professional. So what did you have for ventures like me? When I go to the local banks, they ask me collaterals. They ask me that you are talking about life. We don't care. We want to, where is the money? So this is my real concern. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. Perhaps let me, for the sake of time, and so you have opportunity to respond, to perhaps regroup some of the questions we also get online. There's a question of the SDGs and the same as for the Paris Agreement are a lot of good intentions, good words, but can trade agreements help them to make them more binding in terms of climate change, or in terms of labor standards, or in terms of social norms? So is the fact that it should be more binding. And another group of questions is around the fact that indeed companies are sometimes just looking for profits, which is legitimate, but then not all companies have at heart the inclusiveness and the responsible management. So how to have this leveraging effect to build and to bring these companies that perhaps don't have this interest of development and the influence on the life of people at heart, how can we bring them in and avoid having global value chains that abide to fantastic standards, marvelous, and then are becoming silos and corridors of sustainability, and then the rest of the economy is in a very poor condition. Perhaps let me stop there, and I don't know who wants to start answering the question. Perhaps there was a third one. Now I'm looking at Nestor. There was a question also, how concretely trade can be used, and aid for trade can be used, and if you have some concrete examples to foster the youth employment that is so important. So a large round of questions. You can pick whatever. Nestor, you want to start?
Yeah. Je pense que les différents intervenants ici présents ont suscité à moi quelques commentaires. Je voudrais parler surtout de mon ami de l'Éthiopie qui a évoqué la question de la garantie que demandent les banques. C'est vraiment réel. Aujourd'hui, lorsque vous êtes un jeune entrepreneur, vous avez une start-up, vous allez vers une banque, ce qu'on vous demande, c'est des garanties de 3 à 10 millions de francs CFA. Ou disons, ça fait en tout cas près de 5 000 dollars. Comment on peut demander à un jeune entrepreneur d'avoir des garanties financières ou des garanties de terrain et autres? S'il les avait, il ne viendrait pas vers le banquier. Donc je pense qu'il faut aller vers de nouvelles formes de financement des jeunes entrepreneurs. Du coup, moi, l'idée qui me vient, c'est pourquoi ne pas faire une sorte de partenariat nord-sud où on crée un fonds mondial de soutien à l'entrepreneuriat jeune, de sorte à ce que lorsque le jeune a son idée viable qui est bancable, il peut aller vers le fonds mondial de soutien à l'entrepreneuriat jeune, qui le prend en charge dans la suite de son projet. On lui trouve le financement et il faut également qu'il y ait un processus rigoureux de suivi-évaluation pour qu'on puisse savoir que le jeune à qui on a affecté des fonds les utilise à bon escient parce que le devenir du monde en dépend. Le deuxième commentaire que je voudrais faire, malheureusement, l'ami qui a posé la question sur les accords de partenariat économique, il s'est levé, mais je vais quand même dire ce que je pense. Je pense qu'au regard des réalités stratégique et géographique, on ne peut pas dire qu'on veut aller immédiatement sur un marché européen sans penser à l'intégration régionale. Il appartient aux Africains, et avec en tête de file les chefs d'État africains, de pouvoir faciliter le commerce intra-pays pour que des pays qui sont dans un même espace régional puissent développer l'économie régionale. Moi, je suis souvent malheureux qu'il n'y ait pas réellement la libre circulation des biens, des personnes et des services, comme le stipulent les textes dans certains espaces régionaux, comme la CEDEAO, comme l'UEMOA ou encore comme la CEMAC. Je pense qu'il nous appartient, nous autres également, de pouvoir prendre le devant et de dire, oui, on veut commercer vers l'Europe, mais d'abord ici chez nous en Afrique. Il faut qu'on apprenne à commercer entre nous. Moi, j'imagine un peu, je me demande combien d'opérateurs économiques africains connaissent réellement les spécificités du marché européen pour toujours dire on veut vendre sur le marché européen. Mais non, il faut qu'on commence maintenant à dire oui, mon premier marché, c'est le marché africain. Et lorsque j'aurai conquis le marché africain, maintenant je pourrai aller vers d'autres marchés. Pour moi, c'est du step by step et non de faire tout ensemble. Parce qu'à vouloir tout faire ensemble, on ne pourra rien réussir in fine. Je vous remercie.
Et le commerce, ce n'est pas seulement avec l'Union européenne. Mike.
Oh.
Yes.
I don't speak French, but just you were so passionate about that, I agree with you.
He was saying that it's important to have regional integration by the Africans and to trade among African countries also. It's not just trading with
Then
Europe.
I definitely agree. But I wanted to add another point. I was just reflecting a little bit on the survey that was done before about the private investment, about trade deals, and also this kind of challenge put to us about thinking a little bit more outside the box. And you know, I could put up I don't know if it is a radical idea, or maybe someone's working with it already, but we have preferential deals often for trade deals for countries. We have private investment also supported a lot by donors and other agencies for different programs. Is there a way that we could coordinate this and have both private investment and preferential trade deals a little bit more on a deal-by-deal basis, where we see where it has tremendous potential to work towards the SDGs? So rather than say, you know, this is the deal for this sector, this is the deal for... Can we get to a point where we can be a little bit more sophisticated in really supporting those initiatives that are going to have a scalable impact and really going to make a dent in working towards the SDGs?
Perhaps that's the kind of...
one person agrees with me.
You have one supporter in the room, family member. But I think there's indeed a multiplicity of initiatives, and perhaps to try to find those that can scale up. Arantxa, you wanted to...
Yeah, I am a bit tired of thinking about the box. I prefer to do outside the box, because thinking is great, doing it is a little bit better. Now, do outside the box that you can watch, because it's outside. It's on the ITC's stand. Sorry for the commercial. You will see what the power of technology, how technology is empowering each and every one of you to know what is it that you're buying and what happens with what you pay for what you buy. So you will go with your phone, quick scan, and you will see how the clothes that you buy from certain designers are improving the lives of 8,000 women in Kenya, Burkina Faso, Mali, Haiti, and Palestine, concretely. So they were under less than $1 a day. Today they are $12 a day, $14 a day, $17 a day. Change it into euros if you want. Result is the same. This scheme now, we are expanding, so we've created the capacity in-country jobs to do value-added products to be traded with the rest of the world. It doesn't matter, with the region, with the near region, with Europe, with America. We are now linking this with refugees, with migrants in Europe that we are training in incubators in Italy to go back to these countries because there is a job market for them. So go, quick scan with your phone, and if you're not convinced, come back and tell me, because it means that we would have to improve what we're doing.
And do you also target directly consumers? Because there was an issue of trying to increase the information towards consumers. I mean, ITC is well known among the trades people, trade community, but for consumers.
Consumers, why? Because producers think they have a value proposition to the consumer, and this applies equally to coffee. Producers know they can propose value to their customers if they tell them what's happening in their value chain. Final point, Sam, I think I would have added a last question or a last proposal in your menu of blending private sector with ODA. In the business I am, in the 8,000 women in Palestine, Mali, and Burkina Faso, private sector will not come unless there is an initial investment from the public sector. So the question is not one or the other, but rather how do you blend the two so that you de-risk for private sector to come in big time?
Very good points.
Yes, if I could just pick up on something that Arantxa has been talking about. In terms of my own experience in the International Floricultural Centre, we have just gone through a process of benchmarking standards within the ITC standards map, and it links something which the gentleman was over there saying there, is to identify those areas who are producing flowers under the proper socially responsible and environmentally responsible sustainable practices. So it provides a common crossbar, if you like, for buyers of flowers to make sure they can buy from sustainable sources. And as the statement was made that the consumer wants to buy sustainable flowers, but the real problem is the buying behavior of the middleman of not buying flowers necessarily from the most sustainable source. So we've done a lot of work with ITC, with IDH through the FSI, and it's been very successful. But you've
when
still
I
got
buy my flowers here in Brussels, I have no idea if they're produced sustainably or not as a consumer.
You've still got to convince the buyers to buy in a sustainable way. And just one other point on the survey there, I wonder if you'd have put that survey to a group or an audience from a developing country, whether you would have got a different response of what is more important. And I think what would have come out if the questions were framed slightly differently, access to finance would have been by far the most important. We have a huge number of very focused entrepreneurial young people in Africa who are far more IT savvy, they're far more market savvy than perhaps the elder generation. But what they lack is access to finance to develop their own business opportunities. And it's not just the formal business sector, it's the informal business sector which needs to be encouraged.
So just very interesting. I would like to continue, but I know Commissioner Malmström, you have to leave at 2:30. I was told at 3:30. Sorry. So we have to stop. Can I ask you for some of your concluding?
At 3:30, so
yes. Well, but we started 15 minutes late.
Yes, sorry, but I wanted to comment on that gentleman who has unfortunately left on regional integration, because I think that is a key point. Yeah. And as we started to talk about these EPAs a long time ago, but now only they're starting, we learned a lot during that process. And I had the possibility last week to be in Botswana to sign the first EPA between EU and the SADC countries, and the aim is very much in these agreements also to foster regional integration. I was talking with an entrepreneur in Botswana who has to buy some products, even if they exist in the neighboring country, and at a good quality, and they are there, but it's so cumbersome to get them to Botswana that he buys them from Asia. And you have lots of these examples. But the way the EPAs are designed right now is to try to facilitate regional integration. For instance, in Southern Africa, there's the oldest customs union in the world, South African Customs Union, which will be boosted because all the favors or privileges that are granted within the EPA also needs to be translated between the countries via the customs union. So that is a way to boost it. And we will, of course, with our friends in Kenya and Tanzania, in the other EPA, I hope we will sign in a couple of days or weeks, make sure we do the same thing. Because, of course, it is the regional integration that can bring real possibilities. Then access to the EU market, both when it comes to import and exports, can boost. And also setting out some rules, creating, as you said, a more predictable investment climate, also boosting the rule of law, fight against corruption. All these things will help. But of course it is the region. And we have these discussions with the African Union Commission very much in our yearly exchanges with the European Union Commission as well. So this is very much on the agenda.
If Nigeria doesn't sign by the end of the summer economic partnership agreement, you will not have one in West Africa and you'll have a split region. I think that's what the gentleman was referring to. That is a problem
indeed. But the problem is that these preferences we've been having for such a long time are not WTO compatible. So there has to be some sort of deadline on this. We will have to deal with this situation if it emerges. So it's not us putting a deadline, it's the international community as well. We are in dialogue to see how to help this. But one of the main aim is, of course, to boost regional integration.
Very briefly on consumers and
I think
and unemployment.
The gentleman said that is very important, and I heard also what Arantxa said. I think we do need to do initiatives like that, and consumers in Europe want to know, and we should make it easy for them to have that information, and we should find different ways. Your initiative is excellent. We are looking now at some smaller pilot project based on fair trade in certain countries where we can deepen and focus cooperation in order to make sure that the information exactly on all the steps of the value chains and the money that goes by is documented, is being informed. So absolutely, I think he has left, unfortunately, but he has a very important point, and I took good note, and also about what you said. Let's see how we can do more of these initiatives together, because there is clearly a demand.
And on the last point on the binding dimensions of these sustainability questions that are not binding in international agreements, but that could be binding in trade agreements, how do you see the balance between voluntary commitments and binding commitments?
Well, it depends.
I know in 1 minute it's a difficult question.
If you do an agreement, of course, you sign up to certain binding commitments. And we have also, in most of our trade agreements, sustainable development, and they are binding and enforceable. Then you can discuss exactly how you do that, but it involves involving civil society and so on. So they are binding, but they are based on international conventions.
Well, thank you very much for this very good discussion. I think we can give them a round of applause. Thank you. I've been asked by the organizers in 2 minutes, so I'm also under pressure in 2 minutes to summarize the richness of the discussion that you had on the development and trade link in the 2030 agenda, and how we can leverage the development impact of market forces through international cooperation. I like the way we started perhaps some of the discussion on saying we have to break silos, and I think that's probably the major lessons that I perhaps take from this panel discussion, that there was tendency, and I myself also trade specialist, we tend to see the issues as individual. There's a trade question, there's the employment question, there's the environmental question, and in fact what's, I think the points are well illustrated, especially when we discuss about the challenge of youth employment, which is really the big challenge, especially for Africa, but I think also around the world, is how trade can be truly, and development can become truly a means of implementation to achieve these first employments and to do so in a sustainable way. And that requires to break silos and the approach. It also requires to build on responsibility requirements, but also on the opportunities. And I like what Mike and Arantxa, for instance, were stressing, that it is not just about constraints that are important, but it's also really about the business opportunities, including also for the consumers, and the fact that consumers have to be made more aware. So we have to build on this capacity that could generate this leverage that is needed, which ultimately will also come from the consumer side of the kind of products that we want to see. So let me conclude there on saying that's one of the challenges that also, in terms of the aid for trade, that traditionally has been more about grants and how aid, I mean, I'm wondering even if the word, we should perhaps keep the word, we have not discussed that, we should perhaps keep the word because it's well known, but at least the concept of aid seems to be very narrow when we're talking about the challenges that are around. And so perhaps in revising the aid for trade agenda at the European level, there's a need to think beyond the notion of aid with different financial institutions and how to capture the private finance, and because ultimately it's access to finance that seems to be also one of the key dimensions, keeping in mind all the sustainability criteria. Thank you very much for your participation, and have good actions. Now go back to your work and translate all these good intentions in action. Thank you very much.